What if the chaos in Minneapolis wasn't a failure of leadership, but the evidence they didn't realize they were creating? Because here's what most people felt watching this unfold: confusion, frustration, and that familiar sense that, once again, the rules don't apply to the people in charge, right? Am I right or am I right? Minneapolis looked like it was spinning. Streets were flooded, federal agents boxed out, leaders pointing fingers, and a lot of Americans asked the exact same question: why didn't the president step in immediately? Now we need to go ahead and name the players clearly, okay? Donald J. Trump is in the White House. Tim Walz runs the state. Jacob Frey runs the city. And hovering over all of it is the Department of Justice, watching, documenting, and choosing its words very carefully, especially one word in particular, because this was never just about immigration and customs enforcement. This was about whether local power could openly defy federal law and get away with it. Minneapolis thought it was untouchable. Minnesota leadership acted like the federal authority was optional. And for a moment, it kind of looked like they were right. But here's the part that really stings. While critics accused Trump of hesitating, the trap was already set. Weeks earlier, quietly, methodically, Trump was at least 10 steps ahead, and every protest, every public statement, every order that crossed the line didn't weaken the case, it strengthened it. They called it chaos. Trump called it evidence. And so by the end of today's video, you're going to see exactly why Minneapolis wasn't the end game, it was the test case. Be sure to drop a like for the video, and it is totally free to subscribe to the channel. I really appreciate you guys. So here's the part most people miss. Minneapolis didn't act reckless because it was desperate. It acted reckless because it believed that the rules no longer applied to them. Now, for years, the city and the broader leadership of Minnesota, for that matter, they operated under the assumption that federal immigration law was optional. It was negotiable, or maybe even politically unenforceable. That assumption bred overconfidence, not caution. So now we need to look at how Jacob Frey and Tim Walz behaved, okay? They didn't whisper, they didn't hedge, they spoke openly, publicly, repeatedly, issuing guidance, signaling resistance, and framing federal enforcement as illegitimate. This is not how people act when they think accountability is coming. This is how people act when they think that they're insulated.
You said occupying force. Don't you think it's a bit much?
I mean, look, you can go through whatever rhetorical flourish you want, but when you have 3,000 ICE agents and border control come to the city, when you've got this supposed threat of 1,500 military coming to the city, yeah, that's very much what it feels like. When you outnumber local police officers 5 and 6 to 1, that is the vibe. And so the bottom line is, if the goal were safety, this is not how you get there. If the goal is safety, I can give you a very antidote to some of the violence that we're seeing, and it's have them leave.
Well,
now, sanctuary policies, they created a bubble where federal pushback felt theoretical. Minneapolis leadership assumed Washington would posture, issue statements, maybe sue, but never escalate. They believed political pressure would outweigh legal enforcement, and that belief is exactly what caused them to overplay their hand. They didn't hide coordination, they normalized it. They didn't deny obstruction, they reframed it as virtue. That's not chaos, that's miscalculation. And miscalculation is exactly how traps get sprung.
Local leadership told citizens to call 911 when they see ICE. They did not tell citizens to call 911 when they see ICE officers being assaulted and attacked. And to the contrary, police officers are not anywhere to be seen around the ICE facilities. When the ICE officers are out doing the work they have to do, there are no cops around. And that is not the way that it takes place in cities across this country. In virtually every place we go in, we get support from law enforcement because that's their job. And again, this is not an indictment of the men and women who are police officers in that city. This is an indictment of the leadership that's telling them what to do. And that's why President Trump is looking at all available options and will continue to do so, because the local leadership is not letting local law enforcement do their job.
And so this only works if you don't interrupt it. This is the part that critics never understood about Donald J. Trump's response. Early intervention feels decisive, but legally it's destructive. So if the White House had just rushed in at the first sign of unrest, it would have probably collapsed the very evidence that they needed to prove the intent. That would have been a mistake. Trump didn't need speed, he needed documentation, because once federal authority intervenes too quickly, everything else afterwards gets labeled provocation, basically saying, well, Trump started it, that's why he waited. The narrative flips, the burden shifts. So instead, the administration, Trump's administration, let local leaders operate under their own words and orders. There was no coercion, no entrapment, just observation, and time. And so when critics shouted inaction, the Department of Justice was watching officials speak publicly, issue guidance, and direct behavior in real time. Every press conference, every instruction, every refusal to cooperate wasn't noise, it was self-guided evidence. The longer it continued, the cleaner the record became. This is why this felt slow. It wasn't hesitation, it was legal patience. Because when you let someone document their own obstruction, you don't need theories. You don't need assumptions. You don't even need rhetoric. You just need time. Now, there's a moment like this in real life too, where timing matters more than urgency. Almost everyone eventually makes this call. The only question is when? Before the bill shows up or after? Because the people who get burned on Medicare aren't reckless. They're the ones who assumed everything was fine and they just waited too long to check. Now, most people, they don't want surprises. They want clarity. What's covered, what isn't, and what could quietly cost them a lot of money later. And this is why so many people are choosing to review their Medicare coverage before trouble hits, not out of fear, out of control. And if that is you, Chapter makes that process super simple and pressure-free. Now, most people, they're already calling Chapter at the phone number on the bottom of your screen right now. Phone number is 909-563-8279. When you call them, let them know that your friend Ron told you to give them a ring. Also, if you don't feel like calling, you can click the link down below, whichever is easier, to go to askchapter.org/Ron to get clear on your options. Again, it's totally free for the Ron Yates community, because just like what you're watching unfold here, waiting until the damage is done is always the most expensive choice. So this is where the entire case flips. One word: conspiracy. Not protest, not disorder, not even obstruction by itself. When the Department of Justice centers an investigation on conspiracy, the scope changes instantly. You're no longer asking whether or not laws were broken in the heat of the moment. You're asking whether actions were coordinated, premeditated, and shared across actors. Now, conspiracy unlocks tools that the DOJ just doesn't get otherwise. Subpoenas widen, timelines stretch backwards, communications between offices, agencies, and even across state lines becomes fair game. It is the difference between reacting to chaos and proving intent. And intent is exactly what courts care about. This is why the administration waited. Donald J. Trump didn't need viral footage. He needed a legal predicate that could survive scrutiny. And so once conspiracy entered the conversation, the question stopped being about what happened in Minneapolis, and it became more like who coordinated it and why. And that single word reframed everything. And once it did, well, the clock didn't speed up, it locked in. Now, this wasn't silence, this was direction. Tim Walz and Jacob Frey, they didn't just fail to assist federal authorities, they spoke and acted in ways that signaled resistance. Public statements framed immigration and customs enforcement as illegitimate. Guidance encouraged distance, not cooperation. Local posture hardened. That matters legally because intent doesn't require secret meetings in dark rooms. Intent can be inferred from consistent public conduct. So when leaders repeatedly tell their institutions and constituents to stand down, redirect, or obstruct federal officers, that's not confusion. That is a pattern. And patterns are what prosecutors build cases on.
You saw the governor and the mayor actively encouraging criminals to go out on the street and impede ICE. That is not allowed under our law. When a federal officer is out doing their job, they have to be allowed to do their jobs. And the fact that we had to stand up and tell a mayor, that we had to stand up and tell a governor to stop encouraging the folks that are out there running around trying to stop ICE, to stop encouraging them, when what they really should be doing is helping their fellow federal officers, is something that's horrible. But listen, no matter who you are, whether you're a governor, a mayor, or somebody out there on the streets assaulting ICE, you cannot, under federal law, you cannot impede a federal officer doing their job. And that's what we're looking at. And I'm not going to talk about the investigation, but American people can see what the mayor has been saying. They can see what the governor's been saying, and it's obvious that that has to stop.
Each statement narrowed plausible deniability. Each directive reduced the ability to claim misunderstanding. And so by choosing visibility over caution, Walz and Frey, they made the record cleaner for investigators. They believed public pressure would shield them, but instead it clarified motive. And once motive becomes clear, accountability isn't far behind. They called it chaos. The DOJ calls it a record. What looked like disorder on the streets of of Minneapolis became a timeline of actions, omissions, and decisions that prosecutors could actually work with. Every blocked roadway, every delayed response, every moment that federal officers were left without local support created a data point. Now, disorder wasn't the problem, it was the proof. So when immigration and customs enforcement operations were impeded, that impediment didn't vanish into the noise. It was logged. So when local police weren't present, the absence was noted. When leadership statements preceded or followed disruptions, the sequencing mattered. Patterns emerged. This is the difference between optics and evidence. Optics inflame public debate. Evidence survives courtrooms. And as the days stacked up, the record grew cleaner. Federal duties obstructed, coordination implied, leadership posture unchanged. And this is why the administration did not rush to calm the scene. Calming it early would have erased the contrast. Now, chaos really made this case legible. And once it was legible, it was usable. So once subpoenas go out, nobody controls the timeline anymore. That's the moment this stopped being a political standoff and it became a legal process with momentum. Now, subpoenas, they expand the blast radius way beyond what anyone had planned for. Emails, texts, call logs, calendars, internal guidance, coordination with outside groups, everything becomes discoverable. Now, for the Department of Justice, subpoenas are not a threat. They're a commitment. They signal that investigators believe the evidentiary threshold has been met. Now, from that point forward, delay favors the government. Each response creates new leads. Each omission raises new questions. Each inconsistency tightens the net. And so this is why panic follows subpoenas. Public messaging no longer controls the story. Documents do. And documents, they don't care about spin. They just go ahead and show you who knew what, when they knew it, and who else was looped in. Now, Minneapolis was no longer a closed system. It became an entry point. The clock didn't speed up. It locked everyone in. You don't test the strategy on the hardest case last. You test where the pattern is the clearest. Minnesota, and specifically Minneapolis, checked every single box. Long-standing sanctuary posture, vocal political leadership, organized activist infrastructure, and a willingness to challenge federal authority in public. Now, that combination right there made it ideal as a proving ground. So, if federal law could be enforced here, cleanly, legally, and with documented intent, it could be enforced anywhere. Minneapolis wasn't chosen because it was weak. It was chosen because it was representative. What played out there in Minneapolis would translate to other cities with similar leadership, behavior, and policy choices. And so, this is why the administration let the situation mature. The more complete the record in Minneapolis, the more transferable the legal theory becomes. So once you establish a replicable model, documented obstruction, coordinated resistance, clear leadership signaling, the playbook pretty much writes itself. This wasn't improvisation. This was validation. So this didn't look loud because it didn't need to be. Behind the scenes, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, and the Department of Homeland Security aligned their lanes. Each agency focused on what it does best: operations, intelligence, and legal integrity, without competing for headlines. Now, that coordination matters. When agencies move in parallel instead of in public view, cases stay cleaner, information flows without leaks, timelines sync, and most importantly, evidence collected by one arm reinforces the findings of another. And so, by the time the public attention noticed escalation, the framework was already in place. This is how complex enforcement works when it's disciplined. There's no theatrics, no mixed messages, just synchronized pressure applied at the right moment. Quiet doesn't mean passive, it means prepared. So this is why Democrats panicked. When Stephen Miller spoke about immigration enforcement, he wasn't arguing policy, he was outlining consequences.
What Democrats are doing is vote harvesting, fraud harvesting, ballot harvesting, crime harvesting. Ask yourself, why would Fry, why would Waltz sanction such egregious violence against ICE officers? Because they understand that this scheme, this mass migration scheme, is the heart of the Democratic Party's political power. It is their plan for power today and long into the future. So they know that if this administration of President Trump is successful in reversing this invasion, it will deal a generational blow to Democrat political power.
Immigration isn't about border control, it reshapes power. Census counts determine House seats. Population totals shape electoral college votes. And sanctuary states quietly benefit from numbers that don't reflect lawful residency. So this is why Minneapolis mattered politically. If enforcement succeeds here, the downstream effects aren't symbolic, they're structural. Minnesota stands to lose representation if population figures normalize. Now, if you multiply that that across sanctuary states, and the national map changes almost overnight. So this pretty much reframes the resistance. It wasn't just ideology, it was existential. Leadership wasn't protecting neighborhoods, it was protecting leverage. And once that was understood, the intensity of the pushback makes sense. Enforcement doesn't just remove people, it removes advantages. That's the pressure point. And this is why the reaction was so fierce. Nobody forced them to do this. That is the most important legal and moral distinction in this entire story today. There was no entrapment. There was no bait, no hidden directive from Washington pushing leaders into mistakes. Donald J. Trump, he didn't compel Tim Walz or Jacob Frey to speak the way they did. They chose visibility. They chose defiance. They chose repetition. And pretty much every choice narrowed their defenses. Public statements removed ambiguity. Consistent posture removed plausible deniability. Coordination, overt or implied, removed coincidence. So what might have been framed as confusion became a pattern. What could have been isolated became systemic. This is why restraint matters. Exposure is stronger than force. So when people reveal themselves over time, the record becomes undeniable. By letting it unfold, the administration didn't escalate it. It clarified. And once again, once it clarified, accountability becomes inevitable. And so this didn't stop here. Minneapolis was never the finish line. It was just the proof of concept. So what mattered wasn't just what happened inside of one city, but more importantly, what the response demonstrated nationally was that federal authority could be challenged openly, documented patiently, and then enforced cleanly. Once that sequence works in one high-profile sanctuary city, it becomes portable. So that's the real implication for governors, for mayors, and agency heads that are watching this thing unfold. The lesson is not about Minnesota politics. It's about accountability thresholds. So if leadership behavior meets the same markers elsewhere, public resistance, coordinated obstruction, refusal to cooperate, the legal framework already exists. The record building method already exists as well. The interagency coordination already exists. This is why the administration avoided theatrics. Loud moves draw attention, but limited scalability. Quiet validation builds precedent. Minneapolis showed what happens when local power assumes permanence and federal law assumes patience. One side exposed itself, the other side documented it. The next move doesn't require intervention, it requires replication.
We're digging into the group organization, who's leading these groups. The FBI, Homeland Security Investigations, U.S. Border Patrol are all working in close concert. We're making great strides in identifying the ringleaders, and we're going to bring them to justice. And something else here is it's not only federal agents and federal property they're damaging, but they're also going after American citizens whom they might think are federal agents, and American citizens, say, driving an SUV. They're actually stopping those citizens on the highway, damaging their vehicles, slashing their tires. So it's not just federal agents, it's everyday Minnesotans that are feeling the pinch from these anarchists.
Yeah. They're live streaming it.
Exactly.
I mean, they're taking pride in what they're doing and want everybody across the country to see it.
That's why this feels slow until it isn't. The entire arc of Minneapolis only makes sense when you really understand that time was the weapon. Not force, not spectacle, time. Every extra day allowed intent to harden, patterns to emerge, and defenses to erode. So what looked like hesitation was actually inevitability taking shape. Now, President Trump, he didn't need to prove outrage. The public already felt it. What he needed was proof, clean, durable, and immune to spin. And proof requires space. It requires people to keep on talking after they should have stopped, to keep issuing guidance after warnings were clear, to keep assuming immunity long after it expired. Minneapolis thought it was untouchable. That belief created the record. Tim Walz and Jacob Frey, they didn't stumble into exposure, they walked into it. And once the documentation existed, outcomes, they became a matter of process and not politics. That's what being 10 steps ahead actually looks like. Not reacting to chaos, but letting it reveal exactly what this is. If you made it this far on the video, drop a like and subscribe. We'll see you on the next one.